She flooded hot cake with liquid Jell-O, boiled cocoa and sugar without measuring, and mixed vodka into bundt batter like it was normal. Tricks that vanished from kitchens before anyone thought to write them down. Those recipes are nearly gone. Here are 30 easy homemade desserts from the 1970s no one makes anymore. The poke cake looked like an ordinary white cake until you ran the handle of a wooden spoon straight down through it, punching holes every inch across the top. That was the whole trick, and if you had never seen it done, you would not have guessed. She mixed a packet of strawberry Jell-O with boiling water, let it cool just enough to stay liquid, and poured it slowly over the warm cake, watching it disappear into the holes and fan through the crumb. Jell-O promoted the recipe in the early 1970s, and it spread fast through neighborhood recipe boxes because it required no frosting skill, just a wooden spoon and patience. The Cool Whip crown went on cold. You could make it the afternoon before a party and forget it until the guests arrived. The first slice always surprised people who had never seen what was hiding inside. Nobody makes it anymore. Nobody turned on the oven. That was the point. She brought butter, sugar, cocoa, and milk to a rolling boil in a saucepan, watched the clock for 90 seconds exactly, not 80, not 100, and pulled it from the burner. Rolled oats went in, then a spoonful of peanut butter if she had it, then vanilla, and she dropped the mixture by spoonfuls onto waxed paper before it could set. You had 3 minutes before it stiffened. The cookies looked wrong when fresh, loose and shiny, almost wet, but inside 20 minutes they hardened into dense, fudgy rounds. In Midwestern church cookbooks from the 1950s, this recipe appeared as haystacks and preacher cookies. Boil it too long and the sugar made the batch grainy. Too short and they never set. She knew without a clock. In the fall of 1974, a month after Nixon resigned, a home cook in Hagerstown, Maryland named Christine Hatcher mixed pistachio pudding into white cake batter, covered the whole thing in green frosting hiding nuts underneath, and named it after the scandal, because of all the nuts in it, she said. White cake mix, pistachio pudding, vegetable oil, club soda, eggs, and coconut flakes baked into a sage green bundt. The frosting was Cool Whip folded with more pistachio pudding, pale and sweet and hiding everything. When Jell-O launched its pistachio pudding mix in 1976, the cake became even easier to assemble. It showed up at every potluck that year, every church supper, every block party, a dessert that let people laugh at something they were still furious about. Today, most people have never heard of it. The cover-up worked. Ella Rita Helfrich of Houston, Texas, took second place at the 1966 Pillsbury Bake-Off with a chocolate bundt cake that did something nobody could explain. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, walnuts, and a packet of Jiffy Double Dutch fudge frosting mix went into the batter, and when it came out of the oven, the outside had set into a brownie dark crust while the center remained soft and fudgy, a tunnel of chocolate running through the entire ring. No filling was added. It formed itself. The nuts were structural. Without them, the tunnel collapsed. Pillsbury received so many requests that the recipe may have done more to popularize the Nordic ware bundt pan than any other single dish of the 1970s. By the 1990s, Pillsbury discontinued the frosting mix the recipe required. Home bakers spent years trying to replicate it with cocoa powder and powdered sugar. Some got close. The woman who invented it passed on long before the frosting mix did. And if the tunnel of fudge proved the kitchen could surprise you with chocolate, the Harvey Wallbanger cake proved it could do the same with a cocktail. The Harvey Wallbanger was a drink: vodka, orange juice, and a float of Galliano, the tall yellow Italian liqueur nobody bought for any other reason. And by the early 1970s, it was the fashionable order at every bar worth visiting. A 1972 cooking booklet included with a Sunbeam electric fry pan took the drink and baked it. Yellow cake mix, instant vanilla pudding powder, eggs, orange juice, vodka, and Galliano, topped with a spiked orange glaze poured on warm. Serving it meant you were stylish, experimental, possibly dangerous. When the cocktail went out of fashion in the late 1970s, the cake followed. The flavor it left behind went with it. She always started the crust the night before, crushed pecans pressed into flour and butter, baked until barely golden, cooled completely before anything touched it. In the morning came the cream cheese layer, beaten smooth with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held its shape. Then the lemon pudding layer, spread cold and level with a spatula. Then another cloud of Cool Whip on top. 4 hours in the refrigerator, sometimes overnight, and it came out cold and sliceable in clean squares. Lemon Lush had been around since the 1960s, but the convenience of the 1970s, instant pudding, tubs of Cool Whip, cream cheese at every grocery, turned it into a potluck staple from Ohio to Georgia. It was the dessert people asked her to bring. She brought it every time without being asked. After she was gone, nobody could remember exactly how thin she made the cream cheese layer or why it always tasted cooler than everyone else's. The recipe lived in church cookbooks and was never on the back of any package, which meant you had to know someone. Chocolate chips and butter melted over low heat until smooth, then pulled from the burner and cooled for 10 full minutes, not 5, because pouring hot chocolate over the marshmallows too soon turned the batch into one solid, shapeless mass with no visible structure at all. Pastel mini marshmallows went in, then chopped walnuts. Everything stirred carefully until every piece was coated. She shook sweetened coconut flakes across a long sheet of waxed paper, spooned half the mixture down the center, and rolled it into a log with her hands, pressing gently to compact the shape. 2 logs wrapped tight. Refrigerator overnight without fail. In the morning, she sliced them on a diagonal with a sharp knife, and each cross-section showed a stained glass pattern. Pastel circles of marshmallow suspended in dark chocolate, ringed in white coconut. At Christmas, the cut faces looked exactly like the windows of the church she had attended since childhood. Nobody in the next generation ever thought to ask for the recipe card. The name came from the banks of the river, dark, dense, layered like something geological, and whoever made the first one understood that chocolate could be stacked higher than anyone thought reasonable. The Mississippi mud pie that spread through American home kitchens in the 1970s descended from the Deep South mud cake of the 1920s, traced by some food historians to Vicksburg, where a single-layer fudge cake was topped with marshmallow sauce and frosting while still hot, the 2 layers sinking together into something molten. By the time the Chart House restaurant chain put it on its menu in the 1970s, the recipe had grown into a layered production of brownie base, chocolate custard, whipped cream, and pecans. Home cooks stripped it back to what they could manage. Fudge base baked in a 9x13, marshmallows pressed in hot, fudge frosting poured over top. Neither cake nor pie nor pudding, but all 3 at once. In February of 1978, Mrs. L. H. Wiggins from Greensboro, North Carolina, submitted a recipe to Southern Living magazine that would become the most requested in the magazine's history. The Hummingbird cake started like banana bread, mashed bananas, flour, sugar, cinnamon, baking soda. But then came crushed pineapple and a full cup of chopped pecans, and the batter turned dense and almost tropical. It baked in round layers, dark gold, the pecans giving each slice a crunch against the soft interior. The cream cheese frosting was thick and tangy, smoothed over the layers and crowned with more pecans. It was not a light cake. It was meant for birthdays and homecomings and Sunday afternoons when someone important was coming to the table. Readers in the southern states searched for the recipe for decades after its publication. Most of them were really searching for the kitchen it had come from. The fondue pot lived in a cabinet between dinner parties, still in its original box, and bringing it out was a declaration that the evening was an event. The chocolate fondue itself was straightforward: semi-sweet chocolate, heavy cream, a splash of Kirsch or Grand Marnier, melted over a small flame until smooth enough to coat a strawberry cleanly. The social mechanics were the real technique. Everyone dipped in turns. The long, 2-tined fork with the colored ring that marked which was yours, the strawberries and pound cake cubes arranged on the serving platter, the rule that dropping your dipper meant a kiss or a drink depending on the company. Swiss-French communal tradition, revived in America in the 1950s, reached peak saturation in American dinner culture through the 1970s, before fondue pots disappeared into thrift stores by the thousands. The chocolate still works exactly the same way. It is the gathering around it that cannot be replicated. You could not make it without the liqueurs, and everyone at the table knew that. The grasshopper pie was built around crème de menthe and crème de cacao, the two halves of the cocktail it borrowed its name from, and no substitute produced the same cool, mint dark chocolate alchemy. Crushed Nabisco chocolate wafers pressed into a pie plate with melted butter formed the crust. The filling was miniature marshmallows melted in a double boiler, then folded with both liqueurs and whipped cream until it turned the pale, luminous green of shallow water. 4 hours in the freezer. At the table, a vegetable peeler dragged across semi-sweet chocolate sent dark curls falling across the green surface. The transformation of a cocktail into a frozen dessert was exactly the kitchen logic the 1970s loved. In the 1970s, Robert Redford was the most attractive man in American cinema, and some home cook decided the most indulgent dessert she could build deserved to be named for him, or to outdo him entirely. The Robert Redford cake, also known as the better-than-sex cake depending on who was writing the recipe card, was a 4-layer refrigerator dessert assembled cold in a 9x13. Crushed pecans mixed with flour and butter, pressed flat and baked just until golden. Cream cheese beaten with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held a firm ridge. Chocolate instant pudding made with cold milk. A final layer of Cool Whip spread perfectly smooth. 3 hours in the refrigerator before it could be cut. It was a staple of church potlucks and neighborhood gatherings from Ohio to the Carolina coast through the late 1970s and into the 1980s. She always brought it to the 4th of July. After she stopped coming to the 4th of July, nobody thought to bring it. The recipe card is somewhere. The exact ratio of cream cheese to Cool Whip is not. When the Rolling Stones toured America in 1972, the Tequila Sunrise was the drink on the rider, and by the following summer, every bar from Los Angeles to Atlanta was mixing one. The cocktail, tequila, orange juice, grenadine sinking slowly through the glass to pool at the bottom like a sunset, was too photogenic to stay a drink. Home bakers poured it into a bundt pan. Yellow cake mix went in with orange juice and a generous measure of tequila. Then grenadine was layered into the batter at the last moment so it would streak the crumb red and orange as it baked. The glaze on top was more orange juice and more tequila, poured on while the cake was still warm so it soaked straight through. At a 1973 dinner party, arriving with a tequila sunrise cake on a pedestal plate meant you had seen the concert, or at least knew someone who had. The cocktail aged out of fashion before the decade ended. The cake was never sophisticated enough to outlast it. Nobody called it prune cake at the table. That was the first rule. You said spice cake, or you said grandma's cake, or you said nothing, and let the dense, dark, intensely moist crumb speak for itself. The recipe had been in print since the 1930s, when home economists promoted prunes as a Depression-era moisture source and natural sweetener for spice cakes that needed to stretch further than their ingredients suggested. A cup of stewed prunes or prune puree went into the batter alongside cinnamon, allspice, and nutmeg, and the result was a cake so moist it held for days without drying. The finishing touch was the boiled buttermilk glaze. Butter, buttermilk, sugar, and baking soda cooked together until foamy, then poured directly over the hot cake still in the pan, where it soaked in completely and left a barely there crust on the surface. Prune companies ran their own versions of the recipe in magazine advertisements through the 1950s and 60s. She made hers from a card written in her own hand. When you find a prune cake recipe in an old box, you have found someone's grandmother. It was not a salad by any reasonable definition, but nobody at the Easter potluck was going to argue. The Watergate salad, originally called Pistachio Pineapple Delight before a Chicago food editor renamed it during the height of the scandal, came together in under 5 minutes. 1 packet of Jell-O pistachio pudding mix stirred dry into a can of crushed pineapple with its juice, Cool Whip folded in, a handful of miniature marshmallows, and chopped pecans scattered through. Jell-O launched pistachio flavor in 1976, and the recipe was essentially a demonstration product, a way to sell pudding mix to housewives who had nothing prepared and 15 minutes to spare. Sweet and cold and slightly fluffy, It held its color and its shape and never asked anything complicated of the person making it. Everyone always took the last spoonful. The recipe was printed on the side of the Nabisco famous chocolate wafers box, and it had been there since before most people making it were born. You stacked the thin, dark wafers in a long log, spreading whipped cream between each one. Heavy cream whipped stiff with sugar and vanilla, not Cool Whip, because she insisted the real thing was the only way, and wrapped the whole log in waxed paper and laid it in the refrigerator overnight. In the morning, the cream had softened the wafers completely, turning the stack into something sliceable and tender, the dark and white layers showing in every diagonal cut like a pinwheel. You sliced it on the bias so the spiral faced up on each plate. The whole thing cost almost nothing and required no oven, no mixer, no special skill, only patience and a refrigerator and the knowledge that the overnight wait was not optional. She made it every summer when the heat made baking unthinkable. The box still carries the recipe. The kitchen that made it right no longer exists. Before Jell-O brought them to store freezers in the late 1970s, you made them yourself, and the homemade version was better. Not because the recipe was complex, but because you made them in whatever flavor you chose. A packet of instant pudding, whole milk, a splash more than the box called for so they stayed creamy when frozen rather than turning icy. Into paper cups, a craft stick down the center, then into the freezer for 4 hours. The commercial Jell-O pudding pops sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth annually at peak and were discontinued in 2004 when the brand determined they were no longer profitable. The homemade version never went anywhere. It stopped being made when the children who loved them grew up and forgot to teach anyone the ratio. The 7-Up went into the batter, and that was the secret nobody advertised. Southern bakers had been using carbonated soft drinks in pound cakes since at least the 1950s, when soda companies began marketing their products as baking ingredients to reach the housewife demographic. A cup of 7-Up stirred into standard pound cake batter, butter, sugar, eggs, flour, lemon extract, created a lift that was different from baking powder, lighter and more even, with the lemon-lime flavor weaving through every slice. The glaze was more 7-Up, mixed with powdered sugar, poured over the warm cake so it soaked in and left a thin, sugared crust on the surface. Church cookbooks across the South carried the recipe under half a dozen names: 7-Up pound cake, Sprite cake, lemon lime cake, and every woman who made it claimed her version was the original. You knew it was ready when a toothpick came out clean and the kitchen smelled like a citrus grove in early summer. Most people have never heard of it, the ones who have go quiet for a moment when you mention it. She never told anyone what was in it until after they had eaten 2 slices. That was the whole game. The tomato soup cake had been in print since the 1930s, when Campbell's condensed tomato soup was one of the few pantry staples available year-round, and some resourceful baker discovered that a 10 3/4 ounce can stirred into spice cake batter produced a crumb so moist it was almost unrecognizable as cake. By the 1970s, cream cheese frosting, thick and tangy, standing in peaks, completed the disguise. Nobody guessed. They asked for the recipe and went quiet when she told them. The transformation of a can of soup into something people called the best spice cake they had ever eaten passed between women who cooked without waste and without apology. The recipe came from the back of the Eagle brand sweetened condensed milk can, and it had been there since the 1960s. But most people treated it like a secret they had discovered themselves. A layer of graham cracker crumbs pressed into butter in a 9x13 pan. Then, poured straight from the can, a full cup of sweetened condensed milk over the entire surface. No spreading required, just a slow, even pour. Then chocolate chips scattered across, then butterscotch chips, then sweetened coconut flakes, then chopped walnuts or pecans. Into a 350-degree oven for 25 minutes, pulled out when the coconut was just golden at the edges and the condensed milk had caramelized into a binding layer that held every element together. The bars needed to cool completely before cutting, which was the only hard part, because the smell that came out of the oven made waiting nearly impossible. 7 layers, 1 pan, 1 pour of condensed milk doing all the structural work. The kind of recipe you brought to every gathering until it became the thing people expected from you. The cake had colonial roots. New England bakers as far back as the 18th century had used homemade applesauce to bind batters when eggs and butter were scarce, drawing from European fruitcake traditions that treated fruit as both moisture and sweetener. By World War I, food economists were publishing eggless versions specifically as wartime economy recipes. And by World War II, the applesauce cake had become a patriotic institution, made when sugar was rationed to 8 ounces per person per week and every calorie had to count twice. In the 1970s, it was still being made. In church cookbooks, in community fundraiser collections, in the handwritten recipe boxes of grandmothers who had learned to cook during the Depression and never fully trusted abundance. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and allspice went in with the applesauce and flour and a modest measure of sugar. The result was dense and fragrant and kept for days without refrigeration. It asked for nothing that could not be found in any pantry at any time of year. That was the point. That was always the point. It came to the table warm, always warm, because cold it lost something essential. The date nut pudding cake was a Midwestern church supper staple. Dense squares of baked date and walnut pudding that sat somewhere between a brownie and a steamed pudding, the dates providing a dark, caramel-like sweetness that deepened as the cake cooled. The technique that made it different from any other bar cake was the water bath. The pan set inside a larger pan of hot water in the oven, the gentle, even heat preventing the egg-rich batter from drying at the edges, while the center set slowly and completely. It came out of the oven fudgy and dense all the way through, cut into squares at the table, and served with a spoonful of cold whipped cream that melted on contact. She knew it was done when a toothpick came out with just a few moist crumbs clinging to it. Not wet, not dry, exactly in between. Nobody uses a water bath for home baking anymore. The patience it requires went out of fashion before the recipe did. Harry Baker was an insurance agent in Los Angeles who spent his weekends baking, and in 1927, he invented something nobody had seen before, a cake made with vegetable oil instead of butter, with whipped egg whites folded in last, that came out of the tube pan taller and lighter than any layer cake in any bakery in the country. He kept the recipe secret for 20 years, selling the cakes to Hollywood studios and fine restaurants before selling the formula itself to General Mills in 1947. General Mills called it the chiffon cake and released it to American housewives as the greatest cake discovery in 100 years. By the 1970s, the lemon version was a church supper staple, the oil keeping it moist for days longer than butter-based cakes, the whipped whites giving it a crumb so fine it almost dissolved on the tongue. You had to fold the whites in by hand, slowly, or the whole thing deflated. That part never got easier, no matter how many times you made it. Nobody called it Black Forest cake in the 1970s. You called it gateau, with a slight pause before the word to signal you knew exactly what it meant, and you served it at dinner parties where the tablecloth had been ironed. The German Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte had roots in the Black Forest region. Dark chocolate sponge soaked in kirsch, the tart cherry brandy distilled from Morello cherries grown in the Baden region, filled and frosted with whipped cream and sour cherry compote, finished with dark chocolate shavings curled across the top with a vegetable peeler. American home bakers simplified it. Canned sour cherries, boxed chocolate cake, heavy cream whipped stiff. The kirsch stayed because the kirsch was the whole point, a flavor that announced the cake had traveled. It slipped from tables when the word gateau stopped sounding worth the effort. Before the dinner parties and the gateau and the fondue pots, there were the everyday kitchen treats that never made it onto anyone's party menu but showed up in lunch boxes and after-school plates every single week. The Jell-O cookies were exactly that, a standard butter cookie dough with a full packet of flavored Jell-O powder mixed in, coloring the dough pink or green or orange depending on the flavor she chose. Jell-O ran advertisements in women's magazines through the mid-1970s promoting the recipe, and home cooks picked it up fast because the method was simple and the results were startling. Soft, slightly chewy cookies the color of Easter candy with a concentrated fruitiness that no extract could replicate. The gelatin kept them moist for days. You rolled them in granulated sugar before baking so they sparkled coming out of the oven, the edges barely set, the centers still soft enough to dent with a thumb. She made them in whatever flavor you asked for. When she stopped making them, nobody thought to ask. The cast iron skillet never came out of the cabinet for this one. It went from the stovetop, where the butter and brown sugar melted together into a bubbling amber glaze, directly into the oven with the batter poured on top. Maraschino cherries went into the centers of the pineapple rings, the rings pressed flat into the caramel before a drop of batter touched them. You watched the edges through the oven window and pulled it when the cake had pulled away from the sides and the top was just golden. The inversion was the moment. A plate larger than the skillet pressed face down against the rim, then the whole thing flipped in one motion. The skillet lifted away to reveal the pineapple rings lacquered in dark caramel, the cherries like small red suns in each center. Pineapple upside-down cake had been a cast-iron showpiece in American kitchens since before the 1940s, when canned pineapple made it accessible to every household in the country. She made it for birthdays. The inversion was always her moment. She never let anyone else do it. Brennan's restaurant in New Orleans created Bananas Foster in 1951, naming it for Richard Foster, a friend of the owner, and the tableside flambe, bananas in butter, brown sugar, and dark rum, ignited at the table and spooned over ice cream while still flaming, became one of the most theatrical desserts in American restaurant history. Home cooks in the 1970s skipped the flame and kept everything else. Butter and brown sugar until they smelled like toffee, sliced bananas until glossy, a splash of rum, then everything spooned warm into sherbet glasses over vanilla pudding. The transformation from the South's most famous flambe into something a grandmother could make on a Tuesday was exactly the kind of quiet ingenuity that filled the recipe boxes of the era. She started them Saturday night. Always Saturday night, because they needed to rise twice, and the second rise happened in the refrigerator overnight, and Sunday morning was when they came out. The yeast dough was plain: flour, milk, sugar, butter, eggs, a packet of active dry yeast dissolved in warm water that had to feel like a baby's bath, not too hot, not too cold. Rolled flat, spread with softened butter and brown sugar and cinnamon, then rolled into a log and sliced into rounds that went into the pan cut side down. The pan already had its flood glaze waiting. Brown sugar and butter and pecan halves melted together in the bottom, the liquid that would become the caramel crust once the rolls baked down into it. Into the oven cold from the refrigerator, 35 minutes, then inverted while still hot onto a platter so the caramel ran down the sides. The kitchen smelled like the best thing you had ever woken up to. She is gone. The smell comes back sometimes in other people's kitchens when someone else has been baking through the night. There was no baking involved, and that was the whole point in summer. The graham cracker crust went in first, crumbs pressed into butter and chilled firm in the pie plate without ever seeing the oven. The filling was cream cheese beaten smooth, then sweetened condensed milk stirred in slowly, then a full cup of sweetened shredded coconut folded through, then whipped cream folded in last to lighten the whole thing until it held its shape but barely. Into the refrigerator for at least 4 hours, sometimes overnight. Toasted coconut went across the top just before serving. The pale gold flakes that smell like something warm, even when the pie is cold. She made it every summer from the time the temperature climbed past 90 until the first cool night of September, because it required nothing from the oven and everything from patience. The pie still exists. The summer kitchens where it was made, the screen doors and the box fans, and the women who stood at the counter in the heat and built something cool for everyone else. Those are gone. The name was the technique. You dumped a can of cherry or peach or crushed pineapple into a 9x13 pan, liquid and all, and then you shook a box of dry yellow cake mix over the top in an even layer, and then you laid thin pats of cold butter across the surface, and you did not stir any of it, not once, into a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes, and what came out was neither cobbler nor cake, but something in between. The cake mix had absorbed the fruit liquid from below, and the melted butter from above and baked into a golden, slightly crunchy crust over bubbling fruit that tasted like something that required hours to make. The recipe appeared in community cookbooks through the early 1970s as convenience cooking reached its fullest expression in American home kitchens. It asked almost nothing of the person making it, no skill, no equipment, no particular talent, and delivered something that made people smile every time. That was the whole alchemy of it, the humblest thing in the dessert repertoire, and somehow always the one the pan emptied first. Plum pudding arrived at Christmas tables wreathed in blue flames, brandy burning dramatically as families gathered to witness the spectacle. This dense, dark pudding contained no plums at all. The name referred to raisins, which were once called plums in England. The batter combined sweet breadcrumbs, flour, dried fruits, nuts, and enough brandy to preserve it for months. Families steamed the pudding for hours in cloth-wrapped molds, then aged it like fruitcake for optimal flavor. On Christmas Day, the pudding was reheated, doused with warmed brandy, and set alight before being carried ceremoniously to the table. Hidden inside were silver coins or charms that promised luck to whoever found them in their slice. The tradition required advanced planning and genuine skill, making it impractical for modern rushed households. Plum pudding represented the pinnacle of Victorian Christmas celebration, a dessert that demanded reverence. Date nut roll was the kind of dessert that made children hover anxiously around the kitchen, waiting for the moment it was sliced. It was not a pie or a cake, but a refrigerator candy, rolled by hand and packed with sweet dates, nuts, and just enough cookie crumbs to hold everything together. Families made it weeks before the holiday, storing it away in wax paper like treasure hidden in the back of the fridge. When you sliced it, the spirals of sticky fruit and crunchy nuts made every piece look like a tiny stained glass window, and the taste was just as memorable. It was sweet without being overwhelming, rich without being heavy, and easy to stretch for a crowd when money was tight. Making it was a labor of love, requiring time and patience that people no longer make space for. As store-bought candy boxes and pre-made sweets filled the shelves, the roll faded away, seen as too old-fashioned or too fiddly for modern kitchens, but back then it symbolized celebration, care, and the quiet excitement of a holiday dessert pulled from a cold shelf on a chilly evening. A little forgotten, maybe, but never undeserving of its place at the table. Hard sauce was the essential accompaniment to steamed puddings, a simple mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until light and fluffy, then chilled until firm. The name was misleading. Hard sauce wasn't a sauce at all, but a flavored butter that melted into silky pools when spooned onto warm pudding. Making it required beating butter until nearly white, gradually incorporating sugar and spirits until the mixture could be piped into decorative shapes. Some families added nutmeg or vanilla, others used rum or whiskey instead of brandy, each household developing their signature version. The sauce was made ahead and refrigerated, sometimes for weeks, allowing flavors to meld. At the Christmas table, hard sauce was presented in a pretty dish with its own small spoon, passed around for each guest. Children often found the brandy too strong, but adults savored how cold butter melted against hot pudding. Without hard sauce, steamed pudding was incomplete. Yet today, few cooks know this classic even exists. Chess tarts for Christmas multiplied the beloved Southern chess pie into individual portions perfect for holiday gatherings. Each tart shell held the same buttery, custardy filling: eggs, sugar, butter, and a splash of vinegar that gave it distinctive tang. The tops cracked beautifully during baking, creating golden surfaces that shattered with each bite. Families baked dozens for Christmas parties, the small size allowing guests to sample without committing to full slices. The filling was simple but required precise technique to achieve the right texture, neither too runny nor too firm. Some cooks added lemon or chocolate, creating variations that filled platters with visual variety. Children could eat these without the mess of larger desserts, making them practical for holiday chaos. The tarts kept well, actually improving overnight as flavors melded. Chess tarts disappeared as store-bought cookies replaced homemade holiday treats, sacrificing craftsmanship for convenience. Prune cake was one of those desserts people loved long before they ever admitted it. A moist, spiced treat that showed up on countless holiday tables thanks to its deep flavor and long shelf life. Grandmothers especially swore by it, calling it their secret weapon because it never dried out and always tasted better the next day. The prunes disappeared into the batter, lending sweetness and moisture without announcing themselves too boldly, and the spices wrapped everything in a warm, comforting aroma. It was a cake that stretched ingredients wisely, perfect for large families and tight budgets. Children would roll their eyes at the thought of prunes, but one bite of that sticky sweet crumb made them believers. It was a dessert born from practicality, the kind of treat that made the most of what people had on hand. But as times changed and holiday desserts became flashier, prune cake was left behind. It did not look glamorous, it did not have fancy toppings, and it did not fit the modern obsession with picture-perfect food. So it vanished, even though anyone who ever loved it can still taste it in their memory, a quiet classic forgotten but never truly gone. Steamed plum pudding was the dramatic finale to Christmas dinner. That dark, dense dome carried flaming to the table with brandy blazing blue around its edges. Making one properly took weeks, starting with dried fruits soaked in brandy until they swelled with boozy sweetness. The batter combined Suet, real beef fat giving the pudding its distinctive richness, with breadcrumbs, flour, eggs, and pounds of currants, raisins, and candied peel. The mixture was packed into ceramic molds and steamed for hours until the kitchen filled with the scent of spices and spirits. Traditional families made their puddings on Stir-Up Sunday, 5 weeks before Christmas, allowing time for flavors to mature. The reheating on Christmas Day required several more hours of steaming before the grand presentation. Hard sauce, butter beaten with powdered sugar and brandy, melted into pools around each slice. The pudding was so rich that small portions satisfied, meaning one could serve the entire family. Snow pudding with custard sauce brought elegance to Victorian Christmas tables with its cloud-like texture and golden accompaniment. The pudding was made from gelatin, sugar, lemon juice, and stiffly beaten egg whites, creating something ethereal and trembling. It arrived at the table pure white and shimmering, often molded into decorative shapes that showcased the cook's skill. The custard sauce, rich with egg yolks and vanilla, provided warmth and richness against the cold, airy pudding. This combination of textures, soft, cold, light against warm, smooth, rich, made every spoonful a revelation. Families considered it sophisticated enough for company, yet simple enough for Christmas Eve supper. The dessert required careful timing, the gelatin needing to set properly before unmolding. Children adored the wobbling presentation, while adults appreciated the delicate balance of flavors. Snow pudding vanished as instant desserts replaced homemade gelatin creations, taking its quiet elegance with it. Shoofly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called Shoofly because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table, and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, Shoofly pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Pfeffernusse were those small, round German spice cookies appearing in tins throughout December, their name meaning pepper nuts despite containing no actual nuts. The dough was dense with honey, molasses, and a complex blend of spices including white pepper, anise, cardamom, and cloves that gave them their distinctive bite. Baked until firm, the cookies were rolled in powdered sugar while still warm, creating a crackled coating that contrasted with the dark spiced interior. Unlike soft American cookies, Pfeffernusse were meant to be hard. Almost too hard when fresh, they softened over days as the spices mellowed. German and Dutch immigrant families brought these recipes to America, where they became traditions in communities from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. The cookies kept for weeks in tins, improving with age as flavors married. Children often found them strange at first, but grew to crave them as adults. Making Pfeffernusse meant connecting to old-world traditions, honoring ancestors who carried recipes across oceans. Syllabub in stemmed glasses was Christmas elegance whipped into frothy perfection. This ancient English dessert combined cream, sugar, and wine or sherry, beaten until it formed soft peaks that held their shape in delicate glasses. The mixture separated slowly, the creamy foam floating above a pool of flavored liquid that guests sipped after finishing the top. Families served Syllabub at the end of Christmas dinner, the light texture providing relief after heavy courses. Making it required vigorous whisking by hand, often delegated to daughters learning domestic arts. The wine needed careful selection. Too sweet and the dessert became cloying, too dry and it lacked charm. Some versions incorporated lemon juice for brightness, cutting through the richness with citrus tang. The dessert looked ethereal in crystal glasses, catching candlelight and trembling with each movement. Syllabub disappeared as electric mixers made whipped cream commonplace and the patience for hand whisking vanished. It was celebration in a glass. Butterscotch pie was the kind of dessert that made people stop mid-conversation when it was carried to the table, its glossy meringue peaks and golden filling catching the light in a way no one could ignore. The magic started on the stovetop, where sugar and butter melted together to create a deep caramel flavor that filled the kitchen with warmth. Once the mixture thickened into a silky custard, it was poured into a flaky crust and crowned with a cloud of meringue. Families loved it because it felt luxurious without being expensive, a dessert that tasted like a special occasion even on ordinary days. During the holidays, butterscotch pie was always one of the first things to disappear, with children fighting over the corner slices where the meringue browned just a little more. But as boxed pudding mixes and frozen pies became household staples, this stovetop masterpiece faded out. No one wanted to stand over a pot stirring carefully, watching for that perfect moment when the custard thickened. The world got busier, and the pie slipped quietly into memory. Yet anyone who tasted it fresh will tell you that nothing made with shortcuts ever came close, a lost masterpiece of sweetness and tradition. Springerle were those pale, embossed German cookies that looked almost too beautiful to eat, their surfaces pressed with intricate designs of flowers, animals, and Christmas scenes. The dough was simple: eggs, sugar, flour, and anise, but the technique was exacting, requiring the dough to be rolled, pressed with carved wooden molds, then left to dry overnight before baking. This drying step was crucial, allowing designs to set so they remained sharp after baking. The finished cookies were pale ivory with designs standing in relief like cameos. Families treasured their Springerle molds, carved wooden boards passed down through generations, each one a piece of folk art. The cookies were hard and dry, meant for dunking in coffee, their anise flavor intensifying over weeks of storage. Making Springerle required patience that modern cooks rarely possess: the overnight drying, the gentle handling, the precise temperature control. These cookies represented craftsmanship and a willingness to spend hours creating something beautiful. Suet pudding with hard sauce was Christmas comfort food for families who valued richness over refinement. The pudding itself was simple: flour, suet, sugar, and spices steamed until dense and satisfying. What elevated it was the hard sauce, a mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until fluffy and pale. The cold sauce melted slowly over warm pudding, creating rivers of boozy sweetness that soaked into every bite. Families served this after heavy Christmas dinners when something substantial was needed to conclude the feast. The suet gave the pudding a texture impossible to achieve with butter, tender yet sturdy enough to hold together. Children received smaller portions with less sauce, the brandy content making it adult territory. Making hard sauce required patience and strong arms, the butter needing thorough beating to achieve proper consistency. This dessert disappeared as sweet became difficult to source and modern tastes shifted toward lighter fare. Apple pandowdy was the rustic cousin of all the fancier apple desserts, a dish that did not care about looks or presentation and still managed to win every heart at the table. It began with sliced apples simmered with cinnamon, butter, and a touch of brown sugar until the whole house smelled like the inside of an orchard. Instead of laying a perfect crust over the top, cooks would break pieces of dough and scatter them unevenly, letting the edges sink into the bubbling fruit as it baked. The juices caramelized around the dough, turning each little piece into something crisp, chewy, and irresistible. This was a dessert for families who valued flavor over perfection, people who understood that the best dishes are sometimes the messiest. Children loved it because it felt fun, like a dessert that broke the rules, and adults loved it because it tasted like the orchard harvest served straight from the pan. But as crisps and cobblers became more popular and easier to sell in bakeries, the pandowdy quietly slipped away. Its uneven top was not camera-ready, and its old-fashioned name did not help it survive in a modern world. Still, anyone who ever ate it fresh from the oven remembers the way it tasted like fall itself, a forgotten treasure hiding in plain sight. Divinity was that cloud-like confection appearing on Christmas cookie trays throughout the South and Midwest, a fluffy white candy that seemed to melt on the tongue before you could taste it. Making Divinity required perfect timing and dry weather. Humidity could turn a batch into sticky failure. Grandmothers would boil sugar syrup while beating egg whites to stiff peaks, then slowly pour the hot syrup into the whites while continuing to beat until the mixture held its shape. The candy was dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece a little cloud dotted with chopped pecans. Some families added peppermint extract for Christmas, tinting batches pale pink or green. The process demanded patience that couldn't be rushed, often taking 30 minutes of continuous beating. Children would hover nearby, waiting to lick the beaters clean. Divinity was fragile and didn't travel well, making it a true homemade treasure. The candy represented the time and care that went into Christmas preparations. Nesselrode pudding brought Russian elegance to American Christmas tables during the Gilded Age. This frozen dessert combined chestnut puree with candied fruits, maraschino cherries, and whipped cream, all enriched with egg custard and a generous pour of maraschino liqueur. The mixture was frozen in decorative molds, then unmolded to reveal elaborate shapes that gleamed on silver platters. Named for a Russian diplomat, the pudding represented cosmopolitan sophistication that wealthy families aspired to display. The chestnut flavor was unlike anything else on the holiday table, earthy and sweet in equal measure. Making it required sourcing chestnuts, candying fruits, and mastering the temperamental frozen custard technique. Families served thin slices, the richness demanding restraint. The pudding disappeared as its ingredients became exotic and its preparation too demanding for modern schedules. Nesselrode pudding was Christmas elegance frozen into unforgettable form. Pumpkin chiffon pie was the lighter, softer cousin of the traditional pumpkin pie, a dessert so airy it felt like eating a sweet autumn cloud. It became popular when cooks wanted something elegant but not too heavy after a long day of holiday eating, and chiffon pies were considered the height of sophistication. Instead of the dense custard people are used to today, pumpkin chiffon pie relied on whipped egg whites folded carefully into a spiced pumpkin mixture, creating a silky filling that floated inside its crust. Families loved it because it felt special, almost fancy, even when the ingredients were simple and inexpensive. Mothers would make it the night before Thanksgiving so it had time to set, and children would sneak into the refrigerator just to poke at the trembling surface. But when canned pumpkin fillings and pre-made pies started taking over in grocery stores, chiffon pies faded fast. The delicate preparation did not fit into a world rushing toward convenience. People forgot the feeling of lifting a slice that barely weighed anything, of tasting pumpkin in a way that felt light instead of heavy. The pie disappeared, replaced by versions that were simpler but far less magical. Still, anyone who ever tasted a homemade pumpkin chiffon pie will tell you that nothing has matched its airy charm since. In a holiday built on tradition, it remains one of the sweetest losses. Date nut roll was that glossy cylinder wrapped in waxed paper appearing in refrigerators during December, a dense and chewy confection tasting like concentrated Christmas. The candy started with chopped dates cooked with sugar until thick, then mixed with butter, rice cereal, and mountains of chopped walnuts or pecans. While still warm, the mixture was shaped into logs, rolled in powdered sugar or coconut, then wrapped tightly and chilled until firm enough to slice into neat rounds. Each slice revealed a mosaic of nuts and golden dates, the texture somewhere between fudge and taffy. Department stores like Neiman Marcus became famous for holiday date nut rolls, but most families had cherished recipes passed down through generations. The rolls kept well for weeks, making them practical gifts prepared ahead of the holiday rush. Children often found them too sophisticated, leaving more for adults who savored their complex sweetness. Date nut rolls represented a time when Christmas candy meant more than chocolate. Tipsy parson wobbled onto Christmas tables carrying centuries of English tradition and considerable amounts of sherry. This layered trifle began with sponge cake soaked in sweet sherry until thoroughly saturated, then spread with jam and topped with rich custard and whipped cream. The alcohol permeated everything, making each spoonful warming and slightly intoxicating. Families assembled the dessert in clear glass bowls to display the beautiful layers, each stratum visible and inviting. The name came from the notion that village parsons, known for their love of sherry, might become tipsy from such indulgence. Children received versions made with fruit juice instead, preserving their innocence while adults enjoyed the spirituous original. Making Tipsy Parson required nothing more than patience and good ingredients, yet the result rivaled elaborate French desserts. The tradition faded as trifles simplified and alcohol content became controversial. Tipsy Parson deserved better than obscurity. Coconut custard pie was the quiet heartbeat of Southern holiday tables, a dessert that won people over without needing decoration or fuss. It came from the simplest ingredients: eggs, milk, sugar, shredded coconut, and vanilla. As it baked, the custard settled low while the coconut rose and turned golden, creating a pie that tasted warm and familiar. Families loved it because it brought sunshine to a cold season and reminded them of childhood afternoons. It showed up at potlucks and Thanksgiving dinners long before more elaborate desserts became popular. Older cooks trusted it because it never failed, even in lean years. But as store-bought pies and trendier flavors crowded the table, this humble favorite faded. People forgot how satisfying a soft custard and toasted coconut could be. Still, in homes where old recipes survive, this pie remains a gentle reminder of slower holidays and simple comfort. Nesselrode pie was the glamorous frozen dessert that graced holiday tables from the 1940s through the 1970s, a Baroque confection of chestnut cream, candied fruits, and maraschino cherries frozen in a crumb crust. Named after a Russian diplomat, it became fashionable in American restaurants before home cooks adapted it for Christmas entertaining. Making it required cooking chestnuts until soft, pressing them through a sieve, folding the puree into whipped cream along with rum-soaked fruits. The mixture was poured into a graham cracker crust and frozen until firm, then topped with more whipped cream and candied fruit. The flavor was sophisticated and unusual, the chestnuts providing earthy sweetness unlike any other dessert. Department store restaurants made Nesselrode pie famous, and home cooks struggled to replicate its elegance. The dessert disappeared as chestnuts became harder to find and frozen desserts fell from fashion. Today, few remember this once celebrated creation that represented holiday entertaining at its most refined. Boiled custard served warm in cups was Christmas Eve tradition in Southern households, a drinkable dessert that bridged the gap between eggnog and pudding. Rich with eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, the custard was cooked slowly over gentle heat until it thickened enough to coat a spoon. Families served it warm from heirloom cups, sometimes with a grating of nutmeg on top. The texture was silky and comforting, substantial enough to satisfy without the heaviness of solid desserts. Making boiled custard required patience and attention. Too much heat would scramble the eggs, ruining hours of work. Grandmothers passed down their techniques through demonstration, teaching daughters to recognize the exact moment the custard reached perfection. Some families added bourbon, transforming it into something approaching liquid luxury. The tradition faded as store-bought eggnog became convenient, and fewer cooks possessed the skill to execute proper custard. Boiled custard was more than dessert, it was ritual. Sweet potato custard was the quiet soul of Thanksgiving long before sweet potato pie stole the spotlight, a silky baked dish that tasted like home even in uncertain years. Families loved it because it was simple and comforting, made with sweet potatoes, milk, spices, and a steady hand. It came from an older style of cooking that relied on patience rather than tools. When it came from the oven, lightly set and fragrant, its sweetness came from the vegetable itself instead of handfuls of sugar. Adults swore it softened even the hardest winters, but as shortcuts and store-bought pies took over, the custard was pushed aside as too plain or old-fashioned. People forgot that its simplicity was exactly its charm. No crust, no excess, just a warm, velvety dessert that felt like a hug on a cold evening. Today it appears mostly in memories and fading recipe cards, but reviving it once is enough to understand why it mattered. Sugar plums were those mysterious confections immortalized in holiday stories, yet few modern cooks could tell you what they actually were. Real sugar plums were handmade candies consisting of nuts or dried fruit coated in layer after layer of sugar syrup, each coat applied and dried before the next, until the center was encased in a smooth shell. The process took days of patient work, dipping and drying repeatedly, until the sugar plums reached proper size and glossy finish. Inside might be an almond, candied ginger, or a spiced prune, each variety a different flavor surprise. During the Victorian era and into the mid-20th century, confectioners made sugar plums in quantities for Christmas, selling them wrapped in tissue paper. The vision of sugar plums dancing required knowing what they were, jewel-like candies in pink, green, and white that caught light like precious stones. As commercial candy took over, the art of making sugar plums faded, leaving only the name behind. What was once a beloved confection became merely a word. Blancmange molded in copper forms graced Victorian Christmas tables with its pristine beauty. This milk pudding, thickened with cornstarch or Irish moss and flavored with almond extract, emerged from molds in elaborate shapes that showcased the cook's artistry. The texture was silky smooth, trembling gently when carried to the table on silver platters. Families served it with fruit sauces, raspberry, strawberry, or preserved cherries, that provided color contrast and flavor counterpoint. Making proper blancmange required attention to temperature and timing, the mixture needing precise cooking to set without becoming rubbery. Some cooks added ground almonds for authenticity. Others relied on extract alone for convenience. Children loved its mild sweetness and wobbly presentation, while adults appreciated its refined simplicity. The copper molds themselves were prized possessions, passed through generations and displayed in kitchen hutches. Blancmange faded as instant puddings promised convenience, sacrificing elegance for speed. Pumpkin roll with cream cheese filling was the pride of holiday bakers in the 1970s and 1980s, a dessert that quietly proved who had real confidence in the kitchen. It was never something you could rush. You baked the thin pumpkin cake just right, warm enough to roll but cool enough not to tear, then wrapped it in a sugared towel so it held its shape. Families watched mothers and grandmothers handle it like a fragile secret, knowing a single mistake meant starting over. When the cream cheese filling was spread across the unrolled cake, the whole kitchen filled with vanilla and spice. Rolling it back up brought a moment of suspense before those perfect spirals appeared later on the cutting board. But desserts with shortcuts slowly replaced it, and fewer people wanted to spend an afternoon coaxing a thin sheet of cake into behaving. Still, those who tasted it remember the soft pumpkin sponge, the cool, tangy filling, and the feeling that this dessert was part skill and part celebration. Mincemeat pie was the quintessential Victorian Christmas dessert that lingered on American tables well into the 1970s, its filling a mysterious mixture of dried fruits, spices, suet, and sometimes actual meat. Traditional recipes called for beef or venison mixed with apples, raisins, currants, and candied peel, all preserved in brandy for months. The preparation began in autumn, allowing flavors to marry before the holidays. Grandmothers packed the mixture into crocks, topping up with more brandy as weeks passed. The filling was spooned into pastry shells and baked until the crust turned golden and filling bubbled through decorative slits. Each slice revealed dark, jeweled fruit suspended in rich, boozy syrup. Children often rejected mincemeat pie as too strange, while adults savored its complex flavors that spoke of centuries-old traditions. By the 1980s, most families had abandoned the authentic version for jarred substitutes, losing the depth that only months of aging could provide. Mincemeat pie with actual meat carried centuries of English tradition into American holiday tables. The filling combined finely chopped beef or venison with suet, apples, raisins, currants, citrus peel, and a heavy pour of brandy or rum. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves transformed what sounds strange into something hauntingly delicious. The meat provided richness and body, while the fruit added sweetness and moisture. Families made mincemeat in enormous batches each November, jarring it for use throughout the holiday season. The alcohol preserved the mixture and mellowed the flavors over weeks of aging. Served warm with hard sauce or brandy butter, mincemeat pie was the centerpiece of Christmas Eve suppers across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. Children were given small portions, the boozy richness considered adult fare. Modern mincemeat abandoned the meat entirely, leaving behind only a pale imitation of the original. The authentic version was complex, savory sweet, and utterly unforgettable. The pans are still there. Which one do you wish someone had taught you before it was too late?